Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're tackling the results from those recent special elections in Florida, specifically the 6th and 1st congressional districts. We've got the CBS News articles right here, laying out the facts, and, well, our mission is to really dig into what these outcomes mean, for the current political scene.
Exactly. We want to go beyond just the headlines and help you understand the context, the interesting wrinkles, and maybe what these races might signal now that President Trump is back in office.
Right. So just to set the stage quickly, there were two seats up for grabs. First, the 6th district needed a new representative after Mike Waltz left. He became President Trump's national security advisor.
Correct. Yeah.
And then over in the 1st district, they were filling the vacancy that was created by Matt Gaetz's withdrawn nomination for attorney general.
And these being the first election since President Trump's return to the White House really puts them under a microscope, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Everyone's looking to see if these results offer any, early clues about the national political winds.
Yeah, some kind of barometer.
Okay, let's dive into Florida's 6th district first then. The race there pitted Republican State Senator Randy Fine against Democrat Josh Weil. And ultimately, Fine secured the victory.
He did, yes. But the margin is, I think, quite telling. Back in November, Mike Waltz won this seat by, a very substantial margin, over 30 percentage points.
Huge margin.
Yeah. This time around, with 99% of the votes counted, Fine's lead narrowed considerably. It's down to around 14 points. That's a significant shift.
It really is. And here's a fascinating point. The money race. It was heavily tilted towards the Democrat Weil.
Oh, yeah.
His campaign raised over $9 million by mid-March. Fine's was under $1 million. So the candidate with 9 times the funding still wins, but by a much smaller margin than before. What might that suggest to you?
Well, it's fascinating, isn't it, how that fundraising disparity just didn't translate into a win for Weil.
Yeah.
It really makes you wonder about the limits of money in certain races.
Yeah.
Perhaps in a district with such a strong Republican leaning, there's just a baseline level of support for the GOP candidate that's, hard to overcome, even with a massive financial advantage for the opponent.
So maybe a ceiling for the Democrats there, regardless of cash?
Possibly. Or it could also point to the effectiveness of Fund's campaign, despite being outspent. Or maybe the issues that resonated most with voters just transcended those campaign dollars.
That makes sense. It's not just about who has more money, but how that money is used and what messages are actually connecting with people.
Exactly.
Now, there was also that reported Signal group chat leak involving Mike Waltz, the guy Fine was replacing. This involves some sensitive discussions about Yemen that were observed. Did that news seem to have any impact, do you think, on how people voted?
That's a really interesting question. It's tough to draw a direct line between that specific news story and the election outcome. While it certainly generated some buzz, Fine still won. It could just be that voters in the 6th district weren't particularly focused on that specific national news story, or maybe their party loyalty was simply a stronger factor.
Okay.
It's a good reminder, I think, that national-level controversies don't always have a predictable impact on, local elections.
Good point. And tying this back to the bigger picture in the House, the CBS News article mentioned President Trump's decision to withdraw Representative Elise Stefanik from consideration for UN ambassador,
Right.
specifically to avoid further narrowing the Republican House majority. That really highlights how crucial holding on to these seats is for them, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely. With a relatively slim majority in the House, every single seat becomes incredibly important.
Yeah.
Trump's calculation there really underscores the strategic value they placed on just maintaining that Republican presence.
Making these special elections key tests.
Key tests, exactly,
Yeah.
for their ability to hold the line.
All right, let's switch gears then and look at Florida's 1st district. That was Matt Gaetz's old seat. The contest there was between Republican Jimmy Patronis, who's the state's chief financial officer, and Democrat Gay Valamont, a gun control activist. And Patronis won that race.
Which, aligns with expectations for that district. The 1st has historically been a very reliable Republican stronghold, generally considered much less competitive than the 6th district.
Right, considered safer for the GOP. But
Yeah.
here we see that familiar pattern again with the fundraising.
Mhm.
Patronis raised a solid $2.1 million by mid-March, but Valamont nearly tripled that, bringing in close to $6.5 million.
Wow.
And yet the Republican candidate still wins comfortably in what's considered a safe Republican district. It kind of reinforces that idea we were just discussing, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. In a district with such a strong partisan leaning, even a, significant financial advantage for the Democratic candidate might just not be enough to sway the outcome. It really underscores the power of entrenched party affiliation in certain areas.
Yeah, that baseline support again.
Exactly.
And, of course, the reason the seat was even open, Matt Gaetz's nomination for Attorney General fell apart after that House Ethics Committee report. It detailed some pretty serious allegations, sexual misconduct, and illicit drug use, which, as the CBS reporting noted, he has denied.
Right. So you have a vacancy created under, well, pretty unusual and, frankly, controversial circumstances. However, in a district that leans so heavily Republican, the focus for many voters likely just remained on maintaining that party representation, regardless of the specifics surrounding Gaetz's departure.
Okay, so let's take a step back now and look at the overall implications. These two special elections, what's the immediate effect on the balance of power in the House?
Well, as the CBS News piece reported, with these two wins, the Republican majority in the House increases slightly. It goes to 220 seats compared to the Democrats' 213.
Okay.
There's still, I think, a couple of Democratic vacancies left to be filled, but this does give the Republicans a slightly larger working margin.
And what does that slightly larger working margin potentially mean for them, for their ability to advance, say, President Trump's agenda?
It provides what the article rightly calls more breathing room.
Okay.
A slightly increased majority can make it a bit easier to navigate any, internal disagreements within the Republican caucus and to get legislation aligned with their priorities through the House.
Makes sense.
However, it's still a relatively narrow majority, right? So they'll likely still need a high degree of party unity to pass anything really significant.
Still requires discipline. Now, it's always good to hear different perspectives. House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries, while he wasn't predicting wins for his party in these specific races, he had an interesting angle on these results, didn't he?
He did, yeah. He highlighted the fact that these traditionally Republican districts were even seeing, a significant attention in that level of Democratic fundraising. He suggested that might indicate potential for overperformance down the line. He kind of framed this as a warning for Republicans, indicating that Democrats see a pathway, or at least hope for a pathway, to potentially retaking control of the House in the upcoming elections.
Interesting take. So seeing opportunity even in losses in red districts.
Exactly. Looking for signs of weakness or shifting dynamics.
Which brings us back to that central point that even with these Republican wins, these special elections are being watched really closely as sort of early indicators of the political landscape under President Trump's renewed leadership.
Absolutely. They offer a snapshot, albeit a limited one, of where things stand right now, and they can provide valuable insights into voter sentiment, maybe the effectiveness of different campaign approaches as we head towards broader elections.
Yeah. Just to nail down some of the basic voting details for folks, these elections were open to registered voters in Florida's 6th and 1st districts. And it's important to remember Florida doesn't have same-day voter registration.
Right, you had to be registered beforehand.
Exactly. You had to be registered in advance to vote. Polls closed at 7 p.m. Eastern Time in the 6th District and 7 p.m. Central Time in the 1st because of the time zone difference there in Florida's Panhandle.
Those are key details, for understanding who could participate and, when the results started coming in.
So to wrap it all up then, the headline here is pretty straightforward. Republicans successfully defended both of these House seats in Florida during the special election.
Yes, they held the seats. And as we've explored, the interesting layers really involve that significantly narrowed margin in the 6th District and also the overwhelming fundraising advantage for the Democrats in both races, which didn't flip either seat.
Right.
And then, of course, the unusual circumstances surrounding the vacancies themselves add that extra bit of context to these outcomes.
So as you're considering all of this, maybe think about this. What might these results, especially that closer than expected race in the 6th District, despite the Democrats' massive financial edge, what might that really tell us about what's driving voters right now? Beyond just who has the most campaign cash, what other underlying factors could be significantly influencing these special elections? Things like maybe candidate quality, local issues, or just pure partisan loyalty?
That's the real question, isn't it?
And maybe how might these early results begin to shape the strategies we see from both parties as we move further into this new political chapter? It's definitely something worth pondering.
Indeed. These special elections, while just two races, provide a really interesting look at the complexities of the current political environment and certainly raise some important questions about what's motivating voters as we move forward.